Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, allow me to extend a very welcome to all of you to the CAN Energy Sector Roundtable. This is the second installation for 2022 series. We are very honored to have guests joining us from multiple international organizations across the globe, including government representatives of Malaysia. I'm Hafidz Samsudi from PETRONAS, and I shall be your MC for today. This roundtable is brought to you by CEO Action Network, hosted by PETRONAS. I would also like to thank Microsoft, which is the official technical partner for CAN. Kindly be informed that we'll be recording the sessions for internal reference and sharing with participants later. Now, please allow me to do a quick brief on our overall agenda for today. We shall start with the welcoming note from our esteemed leader, Encik Emry Hisham Yusoff, Senior General Manager, Carbon Management Unit of PETRONAS. This will be followed by the highly anticipated panel of 4 discussions moderated by Nur Hassan Ashinas, IDEA Incubator, PETRONAS Advanced Materials. We will then end our sessions with a sharing on successful International CCS Project by Atsushi Hatakeyama, Senior General Manager of Technical JX Nippon Oil and Gas Exploration. Now moving on to the ground rules. Throughout the sessions, we would really appreciate if everyone can mute your microphones and to turn off your cameras. Also, highlight your questions in the chat space and we will address them throughout the sessions. For everyone's reference, the session is recorded for reference and distribution to participants. Also, we will follow the Chatham House rule, so everyone is free to use the information from today's discussions, but is not allowed to quote who made the comment. During the sessions, please feel free to leave your comments or questions in the chat box. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give you some colors on the CAN roundtables. CAN stands for CEO Action Network and has been established as a peer-to-peer informal network of CEOs representing 50 leading businesses from more than 20 critical sectors in Malaysia. It is a coalition of leaders with shared purpose and focus on sustainability advocacy and capacity building through action and performance. CAN and Climate Governance Malaysia, or fondly known as CGM, are jointly organizing a series of roundtable engagements with key ministries within the government, structured as a platform to discuss policies to strengthen our national climate ambition. In 2021, CAN has successfully delivered 14 multi-stakeholders roundtable sessions with more than 4,000 attendees to deliberate on the topic of exploring the low emissions pathways, covering 4 industry clusters, namely energy and transport, property and construction, plantations, and telecommunications. These roundtables discussions seek to raise awareness and elevate the discussions on CCS technology and policies development in Malaysia and globally. Now let's move to our first agenda. I would like to invite Encik Emry Hisham Yusoff, Senior General Manager, Carbon Management Unit of PETRONAS, to give us a welcoming remarks. Please welcome Encik Emry Hisham Yusoff.
Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum. Good day to everyone, wherever you are. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Emry Hisham Yusoff. I'm the head of carbon management for PETRONAS. In PETRONAS is something that we actually focus now on trying to decarbonize and trying to help the climate. As you know, the topic of today of CCS as a technology is very close to what we wanted to do in PETRONAS, and we believe that this CCS is or carbon capture and storage has been recognized by this United Nations Intergovernmental Panel and also the International Energy Agency as one of the solutions for us to decarbonize and to help us to limit the effect of the global climate change. And we PETRONAS, we see that the Malaysia has the potential to be a great player or even the champions of climate change in this region through the applications of CCS. And what we saw is actually what we've observed is the Malaysia is very fortunate that we have abundance of potential storage that we can actually help globally if not globally, it's probably regionally, the decarbonizations of CO2 in the region. But to do so, while PETRONAS is taking the lead, we also need a lot of collaborations with the governments, with the industry players, with the academia, with with also the technology developers, for us to actually make this happen. You will hear today from the experts from Japan CCS, from PETRONAS ourselves, from DNV and also JX Nippon on their experience and your pathway of trying to get CCS running. So for us to make this happen, it has to be a collaboration efforts between not just the PETRONAS, but also with all the industries. And let me give you some comparisons on what CCS can actually do. And you look at all this technology or solutions for reductions of CO2 in the atmosphere, I think CCS is probably the only one that actually can reduce CO2 permanently from the atmosphere. And if you look at how much, if we can actually capture 1 million ton of CO2 a year, is almost like planting close to 17 million trees per year. So you can imagine that what this can actually help in terms of climate change. So let's hear from the experts. I hope that this session will give you some awareness on what is CCS. And if you have any questions, please do so. Please ask those questions, whether on how does this helps. How do you, when you say what reduction is really, is it really reducing the CO2 in the atmosphere, and how does this help in terms of a climate change? So let's ask all those questions if you have. We have the experts here today, and I hope that you enjoy the sessions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Encik Emry, for the very insightful welcoming remarks. So, ladies and gentlemen, the stage is now set for our moderated panel discussions. Nur Hasana Shinaz binti Muhammad Noor, or fondly known as Shinaz, will be leading these stimulating discussions. Before that, let me briefly introduce our moderator for these sessions. Shinaz graduated in electrical engineering from Curtin University, Sarawak. A mother of three, she enjoys the work of Al-Ghazali, such as Alchemy of Happiness, Deliverance of Error, and The Beginning of Guidance, and watching documentaries such as Planet Earth by BBC. With her 13 years of experience in PETRONAS, she is currently an idea incubator with PETRONAS Advanced Materials, looking into graphene-enhanced applications, focusing on revolutionizing the performance of lithium-ion and lead-acid batteries. Definitely the right person to moderate these panel sessions. I would also like to kindly invite all of our panelists to start turning on your cameras. All right, over to you, Shinaz.
Thank you, Hafidz. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I am absolutely excited and extremely grateful for the opportunity to moderate this session. And I would like to shamelessly invite anyone here within the sphere of advanced materials in battery energy storage solutions to connect with me for a conversation. Sorry, I could not resist advertising, especially when I was informed there is a great mix of audience. We have with us here today. I'm told that there would be policymakers on the line, representatives from the government also tuning in, esteemed academicians, students, young and mature, the general public, and also not forgetting the movers and shakers of the industry, the companies who are going to potentially implement it all who are eager and keen to learn more about carbon capture and storage and gain insights from our panelists today. So thank you all for joining and tuning in. We hope you'll get what you came here for. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our speakers and panelists. Okay, we have first Nur Ain Mat Saleh, General Manager of Carbon Capture Storage, PETRONAS. Noor is a mechanical engineering graduate from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, US, has a project management professional certification from Project Management Institute in 2016. Noor started off her career in oil and gas in 2001 with one of the oil majors in 2007. She pivoted to serve the nation through PETRONAS. Noor has carried instrumental role in various offshore field development execution as both the regulator role in PMU, or now called MPM, and production sharing contractor PSC in PCSB, PETRONAS Carigali Sdn Bhd. So currently she is leading the foundation of CCUS, or Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage, as PETRONAS new venture by introducing different sets of thinking and perspective whilst observing compliance to the need of techno-commercial assurance and risk management. So Noor has cumulative experience of 20 years in managing projects, and her solution focus drive in particular the recent experience as project director of Kasawari project, a mega project with complexity of high contaminants, geopolitical and techno-commercial challenges that has come to play in the CCUS that she is leading. She is also in the program of by World Business Council of Sustainability Development, WBCSD, together with IMD and Yale University in shaping the future business leaders for effective business decision-making, incorporating the need for sustainability element of the world. And next we have also with us here today, Yoshihiro Sawada, Corporate Advisor, General Manager, International Affairs of Japan CCS Company. Yoshihiro joined Japan CCS in 2010. Mr. Yoshihiro Sawada has served as Executive Managing Director and President of the Plant Division between 2015 and 2017, and Corporate Advisor and General Manager of the International Affairs Department since 2017. So between 2004 and 2009, he was with Japan Continental Shelf Survey Corp with a mission to extend the outer limits of the continental shelf of Japan, serving as president in between 2007 and 2009. Prior to that, he was involved in research, engineering, and construction of offshore structures and pipelines at Nippon Steel Co., which he joined in 1977. And Mr. Sawada holds a civil engineering degree from University of Tokyo and University of New York, and a civil engineering degree from University of Tokyo. Our next panelist, James Laban, Regional Head of Sales and Hydrogen and CCUS Segment Lead, DNV. James Laban is the Regional Head of Sales for Energy Systems in Asia Pacific and is based in Singapore. He joined DNV in London in 2002 and has since held a range of technical and managerial positions within DNV in Singapore, Malaysia, and also Australia. He previously managed the upstream, midstream gas segments for DNV in Southeast Asia and Australia, with a focus on FSRUs and the gas to power market. So as a consultant, James has been responsible for a whole wide range of consultancy studies covering LNG and offshore industries. It's interesting. James is a chartered engineer and holds a Master of Engineering from University of Cambridge and a Master of Science in Business Analytics from the National University of Singapore. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, our last but not least panelist, Yasugo Ariga, Managing Director of JX Nippon Oil and Gas and Exploration Malaysia, presently working for managing the overall SK10 project offshore of Sarawak and Malaysia projects as Chief Representative of Malaysia and Managing Director. So very early on, he joined Nippon Oil Exploration Company in 1992 as a geologist, exploration geologist in exploration department in Tokyo HQ, worked there for technical support and geological studies of new ventures. So he has come a long way, assuming many roles across the company and some assignments in other organizations too. JOGMEC, for example, he worked there for new ventures in overseas exploration division in Tokyo as a project director. He was also involved in many projects in Malaysia too, such as the SK10 project offshore Sarawak and the Helang development project as a senior geoscientist in the petrophysics and reservoir modeling department. His other involvement in international projects include new ventures with Petro Vietnam and field development project of Rang Dong field in Vietnam as well. So very impressive lineup of speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get started with some introduction to CCS. Okay, so I think my first question will go to James. Carbon capture and storage, or CCS, is a fascinating concept. Essentially, it's a set of process that reduces carbon emissions, and technologies have been developed to facilitate that, especially in large industrial scale. Now, can we hear from you, James, first on your view of CCS and how do you place CCS against nature-based solutions, for example, in your mind map?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction and for having me here today. It's a pleasure. So good afternoon all. Starting with probably the easiest question of the day about what is CCS. So today we know that far too much CO2 is being emitted into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change. CCS is conceptually very simple. Fundamentally, it is about a set of technologies that intend to capture CO2 and prevent it from being released into the atmosphere. And then we put the carbon back where it came from, underground. So carbon capture and storage projects consist of three parts, as shown in the diagram. Normally, start with the capture. CO2 is captured from power plants, industrial emission sources, blue hydrogen production, or directly from the atmosphere using technologies such as direct air capture. The second phase is the transport. CO2 is transported to suitable sequestration sites, typically by pipeline, although we now are starting to see some projects emerge that utilize alternatives such as road tankers or ships, such as the Northern Lights project in Norway. The challenge with such projects is the efficiency of such transport means, given that most CCS projects are relatively price sensitive. Finally, we have the storage. CO2 is typically injected deep underground in underground formations in a supercritical state where it is permanently stored. Storage sites are normally either depleted fields or saline aquifers. The majority of sequestration projects utilized today are favoring aquifers due to their greater geographical extent or their larger size, and also the reduced existing penetrations in these fields. I would like to address a few of the misconceptions about CCS before moving on. The first that we hear a lot is customers and companies asking about whether there are sufficient suitable storage sites in the world. And to that, we normally answer that there is no shortage of suitable geological sites. We have more than enough storage capacity globally and a long track record of injecting CO2 into the subsurface. Storage sites do require some time to appraise and to develop, but in terms of capacity, it does exist on a global basis. The second key question we often get asked is about whether CCS is an unnecessary distraction from the deployment of renewables. And we all know that renewables technology are extremely important to meet climate commitments, but they will not be able to remove existing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and hard to abate sectors. For example, the cement production industry has very high carbon emissions that arise both from the process heat, but also from chemical reactions involved in producing the cement. And whilst you can convert certain parts of that process to electricity and renewables, you cannot tackle all the emissions from the process that way. So CCS is an important part of addressing this, and the cement industry alone accounts for around 7% of global anthropogenic CO2 releases globally. So it's a very large source of CO2 emissions. Thirdly, a lot of people think that CCS is not a proven technology. Today, there are more than 27 large-scale CCS facilities in operation globally, capturing and storing around 40 million tons per annum of CO2. Sleipnir, the world's first facility used to store CO2 purely geologically, i.e. not as an enhanced oil recovery operation, has been in operation since 1996. So we have quite a significant history of operating CCS facilities. However, if we look at the entire global capacity for CCS today, it is nowhere near sufficient to meet the needs that we have to meet our carbon commitments globally. And we need to expand CCS facilities by more than 100-fold in order to meet the Paris Agreement commitments. The fourth question we often get asked is why can we not just convert CO2 into other useful products? And the answer is yes, it's a very common question, and it's also a very valid question. We can certainly convert CO2 into useful products. However, it is a question of scale. CO2 utilization is definitely a growing and developing field, and there are going to be attractive opportunities to utilize CO2 more readily in industry, but the volumes that we're looking at are far too small to absorb all the CO2 that we're producing globally. So sequestration is essential. The other issue with CO2 utilization is understanding what happens to the CO2 after it is converted. With storage, we know that the CO2 will stay underground indefinitely, whereas when you convert CO2 into other products, for example, fizzy drinks, the CO2 is quickly released back into the atmosphere after the drink is consumed. CO2 stored in building materials or other ideas can be stored more permanently, but it is an area that needs more development in order to expand. Turning to the other part of the question, and another key question that often comes up is why do we not just grow more trees to absorb more CO2? So there are several fundamental differences between CCS and nature-based solutions. The first is where the CO2 is captured and removed from. So nature-based solutions primarily remove CO2 already released in the atmosphere. Whereas CCS processes are typically focused on preventing the CO2 from reaching the atmosphere in the first place. Nature-based solutions are very helpful, or will be very helpful, in offsetting the emissions that we've already released into the atmosphere, and also addressing other hard-to-abate sectors such as the aviation industry, where capturing the CO2 is much more difficult at emission source. It should be noted that there are some CCS technologies that are able to directly remove CO2 from the atmosphere. For example, BECCS and direct air capture, as shown in the diagram on the right-hand side. At this time, though, I would say it's really a question of targeting the low-hanging fruit, and it's typically more efficient to capture CO2 from high concentration streams, such as industrial processes, rather than focusing on air capture, where the concentrations of CO2 are comparably low and require much more energy to capture. The second difference is relating to cost. On a per ton basis, CCS is more expensive than nature-based solutions, largely due to the fact that nature-based solutions are really growing trees is a very, very low-cost exercise. However, linking to our second point about land use, CCS doesn't require as much land to deploy it, whereas nature-based solutions typically are very land-intensive, and this can contribute quite considerably to the cost. And also, you are losing other options to utilize the land for other purposes, such as growing crops. The third and probably the most important point is about permanence. When we talk about nature-based solutions, you're capturing the CO2 in the plants and trees, versus CCS, which is about sequestering it permanently underground. When you store the CCS, the CO2 in trees, there is always a risk of it being released in the future. For example, with the growing risk of forest fires globally, there's a very common risk of trees being consumed in fire or burned, the wood being burned and other purposes, which can release the CO2 back into the atmosphere. To put this in context, the major forest fires that tragically occurred in Australia in 2021 are thought to have released around 186 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, which is nearly double Australia's entire CO2 emissions in that year, in a normal year. The final and another very important part about CCS versus nature-based solutions is about the qualification or quantification of the volumes stored. This is particularly important when we are talking about the commercialization of these projects in terms of things like carbon tax or carbon trading. The volumes of CO2 stored in CCS can be accurately measured. It's easy to measure it's comparatively easy to measure the flow of CO2 through pipelines. It is much harder to estimate the volumes of CO2 captured in growing trees and quantifying those for carbon tax purposes. I hope that's addressed that initial question. Back to you.
That did. Thank you. Thank you so much, James. Just a reminder to our audience, feel free to type in your questions in the chat box and we'll get to it in Q&A later. Okay, so next, can we get your view on this next one, Yoshihiro, sorry. During the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26, held in Glasgow last year, 137 countries have pledged their commitment to reach net zero by 2050. What this could mean is countries need to accelerate the phasing out of coal, curtail deforestation, speed up the switch to EVs, electric vehicles, and encourage investment in renewables. Does CCS play a vital role too in this, in achieving the respective national net zero target? Sorry, that question directed to Yoshihiro.
Thank you for me. Okay. Can you see the slide? Can you see the slide? Just a moment, please.
Yoshiro-san, we already have the slides flash.
Can you see the slides now? Can you see my slide?
Not yet.
Not yet, just a moment, please. Can you see now? No, not yet.
Perhaps organizing committee would like to remotely assist Mr. Yoshihiro?
Yeah, yes, please, if you can. Okay.
Okay, we can see your slides now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here at this roundtable and to share our experiences from the Tomokomai project. I will talk about what is CCS role in achieving national level net zero target. Next slide, please. You may have seen this well-known IEA figure. In order to achieve net zero emissions in 2050, it is necessary to increase energy efficiency, promote electrification, and increase renewable energy. But CCUS is also necessary. CCUS accounts for about 1/7 of the CO2 reduction needed in 2050. Why CCUS is necessary is explained in the upper right-hand corner. First, CCUS can reduce CO2 emissions directly. In addition, CCUS can offset CO2 emissions from hard-to-abate industrial sources by capturing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in geological formations. Without CCUS, we would not be able to achieve net zero emissions. There is some good news about CCUS in the form of advances in CO2 capture technology. Until now, the CO2 recovery rate from post-combustion gas was 90%, and 10% of CO2 was released into the atmosphere. Last year, however, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries announced that it was able to recover 99.8% of CO2 from post-combustion gas. Although the Tomokomai project captured CO2 from pre-combustion gas, the capture rate was more than 99.9%. In other words, thanks to technological development, CCUS can capture almost 100% of CO2, which means that CCUS can make a significant contribution to the net zero emissions goal. Next slide, please. In Japan, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry held meetings of a study group to discuss the long-term roadmap for CCS. And the result of the discussions were published as an intermediate report. The annual storage volume of CCS in 2050 is assumed to range from about 120 million to 240 million tons per year, with a view to carbon neutrality in 2050. This is a rough estimate, not a target value. If CCS projects are to begin in 2030, it was considered necessary to develop CCS legislation as early as possible, taking into account the long time needed for surveys and EPC. Next, please. The key points of the intermediate summary are as follows. The Japanese government had made a commitment to develop a business environment for the start of CCS project by 2030. The Japanese government will finalize the CCS long-term roadmap by the end of 2022. The Japanese government will take the following actions. First, domestic legislation for the implementation of CCS project will be studied, and the legislation for CCS project will be developed as soon as possible in order to start CCS project by 2030. Next, effort will be made to reduce CCS costs. Next, the government will consider how it should support CCS project. The government believes that there will be no incentive for operators to engage in CCS projects unless CAPEX and OPEX are at least fully covered. Next, public understanding of CCS project will be promoted. Finally, overseas CCS project will be promoted. Knowledge sharing will be promoted through the Asia CCS network, which was launched in 2021. These are the policies of the Japanese government. I'd like to emphasize the need for enactment of laws and regulations and a system that subsidizes 100% of CCS cost for the time being in order to achieve net zero emission in 2050. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Yoshiro. Thank you very much for your response to that question. And now, next question is, I'm going to direct it to Yasuto. We've heard from both James and Yoshiro as well. Projects are, there are projects, CCS projects all around the world, and it can take in different form and sizes, small scale, larger scales. What are some of the CCS projects around the globe in the past, present, or future that you're aware of or that has captured your attention? Can you share any interesting facts about them?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I'll be here. So actually, you mentioned the demand for the decarbonization in the resource development is increasing. Yeah? Overseas oil producing countries and also the major companies, oil companies, also try to strengthen and making their effort in decarbonization project, mainly through the CCS. So in the future, the CCS project becomes indispensable in order to utilize new resources such as hydrogen and also the ammonia generated from the hydrocarbon originated hydrogen or ammonia. So currently, Europe and United States and Australia are very famous and main area for the CCS project. So far, the CCS has been the essential technique to proceed the EOR, actually the enhanced recovery of the crude oil. But recently, the role of the CCS business is changing to the means or method of controlling or reducing the CO2 emission itself. So, as I mentioned, regionally, the United States, Europe, and Australia being the hot areas and such technique, but potentially it seems to be spreading to the other oil and gas producing countries over the world. That's a recent trend, I think. Of course, Malaysia included such a trend, and NPM and PETRONAS now trying to promote the CCS project, right? Actually, in the past, CO2 was actively conducted in the Permian Basin in the United States, but since around 2010, more than 10 years ago, but CO2 has been shifted to the capturing CO2 originated from the power generation system or other plant, for example, the cement or chemicals and so on. So number of the projects increased generally, and say it's close to the 20 or 30 projects in the world now. So the PetroNova project, in which our company is involved, and one of the those projects, worldwide CCS project. I mean the CO2 incorporating the CCS. So which carry out CO2 utilizing about the 1.5 million tons of CO2 per year. So capturing such amount of the CO2 and utilizing for the EOR in the some brown oil field in Texas. So yeah, this will be explained later by our SGM technical, Mr. Hata, so in as a case study. So on the, in addition to the this kind of the CO2 EOR, the development of the high CO2 gas field will also be useful for the development of the stranded gas fields, which will not be developed or produced until now. So by separating the CO2 from the such produced gas and implementing the CCS, we can achieve the production of the gas from such high CO2 contaminated gas fields. So the development and the production from such gas fields utilizing this technology will be a hot topic in Malaysia also. In near future, because there are many such stranded discovered fields in here, Malaysia. So as our company also very focusing on the such development from the high CO2 gas field. So very hot area in that means in that sense that Malaysia, I think. Also concerning energy transition, hydrogen and ammonia, the CO2 emitted in the process should be covered as much as possible to achieve true carbon neutral. To generate the hydrogen or ammonia, so CO2 will be emitted from the plant. So we need to capture and store into the some the depleted gas or oil field is quite important to achieve the such zero emission from the plant. So looking further into the future, it is expected more number of the projects that collect the transport and implement CCS to store large amount of the CO2 emitted from the many kind of the industries in the combination with the marine transportation system of the CO2. So typical example of such is the Northern Light project, which is planned to start operation in Norway in 2024. So this is the actually the largest CCS project in the northern area of the Europe, and with total project cost over US$2 billion. And the project is funded 80% by the Norwegian government, and Equinor and Shell and Total Energy have also invested in this project, which use transport the ships, the CO2 after capturing from the exhausted gases from the steel or cement and such factories, and the refineries, of course, also included. So, and also the thermal power plant in the north of Europe and destroy it. So similar kind of the project in Japan, actually, we are such a project is planned and start in some time in 2030. That's a target by the government, and our company also will play the important role in the project. Yeah. So those are the project in the world ongoing, and also they are expected in the future. Yeah. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent, excellent. So that gives us such wide view of what's happening around the world in CCS, and that the industry, oil and gas especially, is going to thrive in developing all the solutions there. So great introduction to CCS. Thank you, James, Yoshiro, and Yasuto. Let's move on to the next part on what's real and what's not in CCS, the benefits of and the myths of about CCS. I'm gonna pick Noor Ain's brain on this. Malaysia, being a significant oil and gas producing country, we contribute quite a bit, don't we, in terms of carbon emissions, and your team in PETRONAS especially is focusing on managing that via CCS. What do you see as advantages in implementing or deploying a CCS technology in Malaysia, especially when Malaysia has announced its commitment for net zero carbon in the 12th Malaysia Plan?
Thank you for the question. Hello, good afternoon. Before I start off and dwelling into what would be the advantage for Malaysia in doing CCS and PETRONAS in particular, I just would like to please allow me to just reiterate about the significance of CCS in the overall climate change effort as a whole. As you all, as has been briefed by our colleague in the first session just now, the CCS is about removing physically the CO2 from the atmosphere. So it is an actual act of reducing the CO2 from the atmosphere, hence the significance of the CCS in contributing to the whole climate change effort, as well as bringing us together to achieve the 1.5 degree aspiration. So that leads to the IEA report, whereby you can see that for CCS has been identified as one of the pathway, significant, I would say, in us moving forward to achieve the 1.5 degree C aspiration. You can see that by 2050, in order for us to achieve the net zero and the 1.5 degree C, it is envisaged that CCS will contribute and address about 7 to 8 gigaton of the CO2. That is significant. Hence why it leads me to say that if Malaysia is able to do the CCS, we would be able to contribute to the whole climate change action plan effectively. We are also seeing that why we think that Malaysia is able and have the advantage to do the CCS. So from the Global CCS International research, they have identified the region, volume, capacity potential in terms of storage size. So as you can see, Malaysia, they have identified to have the potential of about 13.3 billion ton of storage volume. So that is huge. That is significant for us, and if we can able to develop it and turn it into materialize it to be a CCS or a storage site, we would be able to contribute significantly to the whole climate change effort. And that is why I think that Malaysia have the advantage in doing CCS as a main contributor in that pathway towards the net zero as well as the climate change. The other advantage that we can see is that the strategic location of Malaysia Basin, the Malaysia Basin, because it is actually situated in a safe zone. We are not in the Pacific Rim of fire. So the movement of the tectonic plate is pretty much almost negligible for most of our reservoir. So it offers a more safety element or safety features in terms of doing a permanent storage of the CO2. The third item is about, again, the location. Malaysia is situated centrally on a seaborne energy trade routing. So the accessibility will be good if we are able to develop the storage site. And when I said the accessibility, this is about the accessibility for other industry emitters around the region in the country that have a limited geological sites that is suitable for storage site, to consider using the storage site that we have in Malaysia as a reinjection sites. Of course, when we talk about CCS as the climate action effort, I do see there is a question from the audience about, are we gonna get the positive offset by doing the CCS? Because what if the energy that is required to power the infra of doing the CCS is higher, and the giving out emission is higher than what we can sequestrate? Of course, that is one of the dimension in doing CCS that we need to look into in details to ensure that the design of the facilities as well as the energy efficiency usage for the facilities of the CCS is lower, is being taken care of in order for us to develop the infrastructure in a low carbon emission design. Okay, that is about the whole geological structure as well as the infrastructure for the CCS. If we're looking at the socio-economic benefit by having the CCS in Malaysia, we can see that it's projected that CCS will able to help address about 43% of Malaysia emission if we are able to materialize the storage site that we have. And in terms of the job creation, we are looking at about 6% reduction on the Malaysia overall unemployment over the next 30 years. We believe there will be a job opportunity creation by building up the CCS as a new industry in Malaysia. And also, CCS will become an enabler or a spin-off sectors for the other low carbon products such as the blue hydrogen, ammonia, as well as bioenergy. So in the next area of coverage that I would like to talk about is actually about mapping the advantage to the Malaysia commitment of the COP26. So we can see that by doing CCS in Malaysia, we will be able to greatly support the first, which is the first commitment that has been declared by Malaysia in COP26, which is meeting up to the NDC commitment, the 45% in 2030 compared to 2005 level. The second one is about pretty much related, because the moment we are able to help support meeting the 45% directly, it will enable Malaysia to also achieve the net zero GHG emission as early as 2050. And again, because just now I've already mentioned that CCS can be an enabler to a low carbon product, low carbon solution and low carbon product. So there will be a contribution of CCS to the long-term, long emission development strategy via the enabling the other low carbon solution product. And finally, number 3, this is more on still in an exploratory mode. We believe that through CCS, we may be able to participate in the voluntary carbon market as well. But again, the viability of this is yet to be established and need to be worked further.
Thank you, Noor, for that very clear explanation on the advantages of having CCS in Malaysia. Now, back to Yoshihiro. We've not heard only of successes in CCS, but also failures. With industrial scale implementation, failures in CCS can be catastrophic, I would say, and life-threatening. So what are your thoughts around that? How safe is CCS currently? I think you're on mute.
Okay, I'll talk about how safe is CCS. I'd like to share with you our experiences from the Tomakomai project. This is the project scheme of the Tomakomai project. The CO2 emission source is the hydrogen production unit of adjacent oil refinery, which provides a gas containing approximately 50% CO2. The gas is transported by pipeline to the Tomakomai project capture facility, which has a capacity of 200,000 tons per year. After capture and compression, the CO2 is injected into 2 offshore subsea bed reservoirs. We have mainly injected CO2 into the shallower formation, which has a good injectivity. Next, please. The Tomakomai project is the first large-scale CCS demonstration project in Japan. Tomakomai is a large city located on Hokkaido Island, 800 kilometers north of Tokyo. The main objectives and tasks of the project are to demonstrate a full-chain CCS system from capture to storage, to demonstrate that the CCS system is safe and reliable, to remove concerns about earthquakes by the data collected, to confirm there is no influence by natural earthquakes on CO2 stored, to confirm no perceptible earth tremors are induced by CO2 injection. Next, please. We have conducted 3D seismic surveys prior to CO2 injection at 65,000 tons, 207,000 tons, and at 300,000 tons of CO2 injection into the shallower formation. The bright spots correspond to the extent of the injected CO2 and confirm that the CO2 plume is evolving with the progress of injection, and that the CO2 is being stably stored in a limited area around the injection well. Next, please. A special concern for CCS in Japan is earthquakes. The safety and security of CO2 storage at the Tomakomai site was seriously tested by the occurrence of the magnitude 6.6 earthquake in September 2018. The epicenter was 30 kilometers from the injection area at a depth of 37 kilometers and caused massive destruction in a nearby village. The seismic intensity at the demonstration site was lower 5, but no damage was incurred by our facilities. Actually, many earthquakes have occurred historically in this area to the east, and it is believed that this earthquake was within the scope of seismic activities expected in this region. Next, please. This diagram shows the bottom hole pressures and temperatures monitored in the shallower formation injection well before and after the earthquake. We had been injecting from July, which is indicated by a rise in the temperature and pressure. 5 days prior to the earthquake, the supply of CO2 from the refinery stopped due to technical issues, causing a suspension of injection, and the temperature and pressure in the well were in decline. It was during this decline that the earthquake struck. It caused an island-wide blackout, causing a break in the data. However, when we regained power 3 days later, the continuation of the decline can be observed, clearly indicating that the conditions in the reservoir were unaffected by the earthquake. Our experience in Tomakomai is that even though a large earthquake occurred nearby, there was no CO2 leakage. Also, CCS started in the United States in 1972. There has not been any CO2 leakage. We believe that CCS is a safety technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiro. Thank you for that. Where are we? So we have now a better overview of CCS and the benefits it offers. Let's finish off by looking at the challenges and the way forward of CCS in Malaysia. So part 3 is of this session is just looking at that. Let's start with Yasuto. It goes without saying, really, that support from the government and the buy-ins from the general public are critical to ensure successful adoption and scale-up of CCS globally. How should or would government enable fast-paced development and deployment of CCS projects?
Yeah, right. Thank you very much for your question. So I believe the key success is the key of the successful success is how to government support the companies that are concerning to early implementation of the CCS, and how to reduce and how to relieve the concerns of such companies. That's quite important. And for example, one of the important factors for the establishment of such business is the project economics, right, for the private companies. From the corporate side, it is not easy to invest unless the whole ecosystem, including the healthy economics and profitability, are expected. So if it becomes not economically and project over, so in that case we cannot invest any more money in implementing such project, of course. And it discourages and hesitate not only the company and also the other investors. So then as a result, in the long run, the country will suffer major losses, and marketing new businesses due to such situations. So it is important for the company to establish the new business model, which is also important for the host country. Yeah, that's I believe the win-win situation we are expecting. So, for instance, if the project to promote the development of the high CO2 gas field with integrating CCS, it will be essential to provide the measures such as setting the higher gas price and considering the tax incentives to ensure the attractive economy for such private companies and the players. So in addition, and if the usage of the depleted oil and gas fields is to be considered as a CO2 storage site, it is necessary to consider the preferential treatment in each phases after considering the costs of the transporting the CO2 and also the economic efficiency of the comprehensive project such as including the capex, opex, and such expenditures on the receiving the facility side. This will attract a lot of companies which will eventually secure the position as a CCS hub in Southeast Asia and long-term front runners. So in particular, there are many oil and gas fields in Malaysia. Those production has ended or is almost about to end. Therefore, so Malaysia is a considerable potential country in terms of the effective utilization of such new resources. So, and another important factor in promoting CCS is the development preparation of the law relating to CCS. So, needless to say, the CCS is not a short-term project, but the one it's important to safely store the CO2 for a long time and underground. So, however, it is unacceptable for the private companies should have some held permanent responsibility. I mean, of course, we will do our best to follow the guideline, PETRONAS, or to work safely, of course, and to store over the long period the time as much as possible. But there is a limit to the time and the scope of the responsibility. So this is a major risk for the private sectors and private companies. For certain period of the time, such as 10 years or 20 years, the private company is able to responsible and also the work will carry out without so approval of national oil companies. And, but beyond that, the government of the host country has to take over and manage it. Such points. Yeah, so this is it be necessary to fix the host country side, like Malaysia. Yeah. So thank you very much. Over to you.
Shinaz, you're on mute.
Sorry. I was just saying to myself that it's 3:40. We've got a couple of more questions to go through before we can go to Q&A. So I'm just going to ask this quickly to James. How do we mitigate the risks associated with CCS? And sorry, if this question makes sense, how does that relate to the effect of NDC, the nationally determined contributions?
Very good. I will try to address this question very quickly. So first of all, CCS projects, as with any other sort of gas project, have typical project associated and technical associated risks. But companies like PETRONAS, with extensive experience of operating oil and gas projects in the past, are able to manage those. So there's a few specific project risks that are unique to CCS projects or common to CCS projects and have stopped or halted CCS projects in the past. I believe other esteemed speakers have already referred to some of these, but running through these, the first is a cross-chain risk. So essentially early projects, CCS projects, we're looking at one common producer of CO2, one capture facility, and then one sequestration site. So you needed both parts to be fully operational in order to move the project forward. What we're seeing much more approach in the industry now to look at CCS clusters. So the diagram at the top right of the screen is showing the proposed Teesside cluster in the UK, where you have many producers of CO2 connected to multiple sequestration sites. And the idea here is that you reduce the risk of reduce the project risk by bringing together multiple sources and multiple sequestration sites. This is something that's also being looked at in Malaysia. Another part of this is the ability to ship CO2 to make better use of existing sequestration sites. And again, this has already been briefly touched upon. Malaysia is a great candidate to import CO2 or to ship CO2 from other sites and to sequester them in existing fields. The second key risk is about storage liability. We know that CCS can be safe and the CO2 can be stored in perpetuity. However, Obviously, there is still the liability risks, ensuring that CO2 remains underground. Typically, this can be broken down into two parts. The first part is really about the design of the project. So good selection of sites, good monitoring of the CO2 once it's underground, and ensuring that you don't have any, that you don't have the field that you've selected is robust without multiple release points, and you're keeping the CO2 underground. Eventually, the fields, if you can demonstrate for a certain number of years that the field is safe and that the CO2 remains underground, eventually the liability will be passed from companies back to governments, who will certainly outlive commercial entities. Once the government takes over, you need to have been able to demonstrate, probably through third-party certification, that the field has been properly set up and managed. Another part of this could be the insurance industry, which is expected to play a key role in providing products to address long-term storage liability for sequestration sites, certainly in Europe. The third risk, which has already been discussed a little bit, is about revenue uncertainty. Obviously, for private companies, they will only engage in CCS activities if they can ensure a consistent revenue stream. Injecting CO2 underground in and of itself doesn't generate revenue, so you're normally looking at getting payment either via some form of carbon tax or because it enables you to develop a very profitable project nearby, such as these high CO2 gas fields. Typically, a way to mitigate the long-term revenue risk is about having consistent long-term predictable policy from government. For example, in Europe, there's a well-understood carbon tax, the EU ETS, which penalizes large-scale industrial plants from emitting CO2. And this is driving many emitters to look more closely at CCS as a solution. You can see in the bottom right the futures prices for the EU ETS. These are rising quite steeply, and that price is really a driver to commercialize these projects. Addressing the second part of the question about nationally determined contributions, very briefly, I mean, national NDCs are a requirement for countries that have signed up to the Paris Agreement. 194 countries have submitted NDCs, but of these, 14 have specified CCS as a key part of their NDC, made it part of their action plan to address decarbonization in their countries. Beyond this, there's another requirement that countries come up with a long-term plan, and around 80% of the countries that have signed up to the Paris Agreement have referenced CCS as part of their long-term plan to decarbonize their nations. A related part of this is the UNFCCC Article 6, which is specifically is related to NDCs, and it's about allowing countries to, on a voluntary basis, to support each other by moving carbon CO2 between the countries to enable the shipping of CO2 from one country to the other. But critically, it's about avoiding double counting. So one of the key parts of the Article 6 is that only one country can take credit for CO2 captured to prevent overestimation of global emission reductions. But this is really about supporting countries in achieving their NDCs. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Final question for our panelists today. Noor, do we have, I think it's a question everybody wants to hear the response to as well. Do we have what it takes to deploy CCS in Malaysia? At scale, at scale.
I thought I can get away with that at scale. Okay. Yes, we do. So basically, I have already give a glimpse of the potential, which is about in terms of the storage size, which is about 13.3 billion. So the next step is actually for us to pursue further validating, performing our due diligence to ensure that the storage, the potential storage site is actually meeting the criteria for us to materialize the CCS safely and doing the permanent storage of the CO2. So we have the data because currently the selection of the areas are, there is two actually, the depleted reservoir, and also we are exploring into the aquifer itself. Aquifer meaning the reservoir that doesn't have the hydrocarbon. So we do, for the depleted reservoir, we do have vast data because we have been at that location for quite some time doing the production of the hydrocarbon. So we can analyze, model the behavior of the reservoir and look at how the seal is tight and suitable to contain the CO2. So that is where we are in terms of the work progress in moving forward to validate the potential of the storage site. So apart from that, we are also coming up because CCS is only gaining traction recently. So we need to sort of like go with the selection of the appropriate technology to deliver the CCS at scale as well as at pace. I would also want to add at pace and at a competitive price. Hence why we need to do the proper technology selection for the CCS. And as I have mentioned before, one of the challenges in doing the technology selection is actually about choosing and designing the infrastructure to be a low carbon emission, as low as possible, so that we can achieve the objective of doing CCS, the true objective of doing CCS, which is reducing the CO2 from the atmosphere. So in doing so, there is also the technical risk, the surface technical risk that we need to address, the readiness and the availability of the transportation, especially if we are looking at serving the regional industry for the CCS. We will require a liquid CO2 carrier, and that is actually at scale, at a big size, at a long haul, we don't have it. Hence, is one of the area that we need to look into, and again, doing all the engineering, selection of the technology, so that that particular transportation is ready when we have the other the other value chain ready as well. So apart from that technical risk, we are also looking up to build the ecosystem. Well, again, CCS is a new space for Malaysia. We are currently working closely with the relevant ministry in Malaysia for us to come up with the supportive policy that can push forward for the materialization of the CCS. So given these three elements, the technical risk, the ecosystem for the CCS to flourish, we strongly believe, we mean PETRONAS strongly believe that we cannot do it alone. We need to bring together the other partners and the other technical expert, as well as the contributor or the player in the ecosystem together in order to build and develop the CCS. Hence, why you are seeing there's a lot of press release indicating and demonstrating PETRONAS entering into an MOU with the players that are interested to do CCS. The main objective is that PETRONAS doesn't have the answer alone. We need to find partners that we can together leverage on each other's strength to build up the CCS ecosystem that will help for us to realize the CCS as the new industry in Malaysia. And the way we approach it is actually, again, we are approaching it through the value chain, because each of the value chain, the emission and capture, transport, sequestration and storage and others, need to come together at the same timeline and the same readiness for us to deliver the CCS. I hope I've already provided a comprehensive response to you.
You did. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nur Ain, Yasuto, Yoshihiro, and James for your time and valuable insights. I hate that we're running out of time, but we need to make time for the next session. It's been a pleasure facilitating this session. And we don't have time, I'm afraid, to answer the questions that we've received in the chat box. We'll try to figure out how to have them answered offline and share it back to you. Thank you for your questions. I need to hand it back to Hafidz for the next agenda.
All right, I think such an informative and engaging panel sessions, I must say. A lot of patience from the expert panelists and equally from the participants. Thank you and thumbs up, Shinas, for moderating. But before I let our panelists go, I would like to invite everyone to stay on your camera. Shinas and our dear panelists, please turn on your camera. Stay on the camera for the photo sessions. I would also like to invite Encik Emry to join us for the photo sessions. All right, so we'll be taking photo in 3, 2, 1. Smile. Okay, one more. All right, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time with us this afternoon. Thank you so much to everyone. All right, so now moving on to our next exciting agenda, the real deal. Our next agenda is a presentation sharing by Atsushi Hatakeyama. So he is the Senior General Manager of Technical from JX Nippon Oil and Gas Exploration. So Hatakeyama-san will be sharing on successful international CCS project, which is Petra Nova. So we all know that CCS real, so let's hear it directly from the project owner himself.
Okay.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. By the way, my time is still 15 minutes, or do I need to cut to 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever? Hello?
I think we can allow for 15 minutes max, but if you can do it in 10 minutes, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, so let me start my presentation. I'm Atsushi Hatakeyama from JX Nippon. Today, I will share some project experience to share the successful international CCS project. So my title is CO2 Management Technologies and the Sustainable Energy Developments. Since the success of a CCUS or CCS project cannot be done in one time, so it is very much important based on the accumulation of many challenging, many experience, something like that. So first, I will talk who we are and also the history of our environmental friendly business development. So who we are JX and the ENEOS Group. The ENEOS Group is the #1 share company of the downstream sector. It is 50% share in Japan. And we are JX Nippon, which covered upstream sector, and some major companies covering the mining, minerals. So we are kind of one of the largest energy group in Japan. And we are JX Nippon is a prudent operator of the SK10 block in offshore Sarawak since 2003. Now we are supplying gas from 3 gas fields, which is Helan, Lion Barrel, to the MLNG plant in Bintulu. Now we are producing around 400 million cubic feet per day of the gas, which is roughly around 10% of the total MLNG demand. So we are now operating this field. Okay, this is our history of the Sustainable E&P project. I will pick up 4 projects. In 2000, we achieved the zero flaring project in such a very high sour gas field in Middle East. The gas contains like 10% H2S, not ppm, 10% H2S and 20% CO2. We are injecting into the reservoir to stop the flaring. This is one of our CO2 management technologies. And then we conducted the UN CDM project, Green Development Mechanism project in Vietnam, by stop flaring, but sending gas to shore to take certified emission reduction. I will touch upon this project a little bit. Then in 2011, we have successfully conducted CO2 pilot tests offshore, which is the first offshore CO2 EOR project in Southeast Asia. And today's major topic is PETRONAS project, which we start production operation in 2017. The first project is Vietnam CDM project. This is the world first E&P sector CDM project at that time in 2003. Again, we stopped flaring to reduce the GHG emission and by constructing new pipeline to send the gas to the shore. So by this project, we get certified emission reduction of 9 million tons since 2001 to 2011. So we also have kind of methodology development for the United Nations CDM as a kind of world-class level. Now we are moving into our forecast project, PETRONAS. This is the in US, and here is a Gulf of Mexico, around the Gulf of Mexico map. Here located Houston, and we have a power plant called WA Parish. And we capture the CO2 from the flue gas and send CO2 to the onshore oil field by newly installed pipeline. So here's more details. We get the flue gas from 640 megawatt coal-fired power plant. That flue contains 30% CO2. Then we capture the CO2 by newly constructed carbon capture system, which is amount of 5,000 tons per day of CO2. And so far, we captured more than 3.6 million tons of CO2 by this project. Here's a picture of the PETRONAS facility. Here you can see the two major towers is absorber and regenerator. This is a so-called chemical absorption process utilizing amine. This absorber tower is 100-meter height, and the footprint is around 30 meter. And the regeneration tower is also a bit smaller, but a very big size. And by using this capture plant, we take 99.99% of CO2, 5,000 tons per day, which is around 80 million cubic feet per day of CO2 was sent to field by pipeline. This is another key success factor for this project. This is commercial structure. This is a kind of 50% joint project by NRG, who is the owner of the power plant, and JX. And for the carbon capture plant, the total cost was around $400 million. But say almost half of the money was awarded from U.S. Department of Energy, and also some good support from Japanese government agency. So this kind of key is to be a successful project is a kind of national support from US and Japan. That is a kind of a key structure. And also the development of CO2 monitoring program, a comprehensive monitoring program is also very important to be successful. So this monitoring program was constructed by JX, NRG, and Texas University Bureau of Economic Geology. They are expert on the CO2 monitoring. So we set up all those monitoring programs like the reservoir modeling, mass balance accounting, pressure monitoring, blah, blah, blah. And we are reporting this to DOE. This is a kind of a key success parameters. So here we listed lesson learned from those CCS project, which is technical evaluation and evolution, engineering design and its management, the commercial structuring, the government grant application, environmental study management, so many items which we have learned. But I can insist that, say, only by doing this kind of a CCS US project, we can learn a lot. So, for example, CO2 injected CO2 behavior in the reservoir. So I really hope that those experience lessons learned, which we get from this project, shall be shared in the other countries like Southeast Asia and Malaysia. And now we are doing other project. For example, this is kind of a CO2 and the hydrocarbon gas volume in the reservoir in Peninsular Malaysia and the East Natuna and the Sarawak. So still a lot of hydrocarbon is remaining, but it comes with CO2. So how we can develop those hydrocarbon without huge environmental impact? That the answer is CCS. So we hope we can develop those gas without environmental impact. That is our view. Also, we are spending our investment for the new technologies like project company 8 Rivers, which is owner of a supercritical CO2 cycle power generation. We are developing new technology together, and also we are doing CCS hub project called Deep Sea Store in Australia. So such kind of technology collaboration is also the very key success factor for the CCS CCUS projects. Oh, this is the last slide. Okay. JX Nippon commits to oil and gas field development with environmental harmony with CO2 management technologies, which was established in Vietnam, US. Some more details, experience of the commercial scale CCUS project, underground management with comprehensive CO2 monitoring, safety operation, and the global collaboration for innovative decarbonization technologies. JX Nippon expects remarkable outcome from the joint study in Malaysia, a solution for high CO2 gas field development, blue hydrogen supply chain concept. And again, the regulatory framework is a critical element for the development and the deployment of CCS project in Southeast Asia. I hope such a legal framework, commercial framework development in this region is a key for also the successful CCS project. That's all my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Hatakeyama-san, for the wonderful sharing. I hope it triggers everyone here to make CCS a reality in Malaysia as a hub for the region. Ladies and gentlemen, so we are nearing the end of our roundtable sessions. A big thank you for everyone. I hope you have benefited from the session as much as I have. My name is Hafidz Samsudi, signing off as your MC for today. And I really hope that you continue to stay safe and to continuously play an active role in sustainability advocacy and action. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again in other series of CAN Roundtables. The next one is going to be in September, so stay tuned. Bye everyone for now. Thank you.